Hello, I'm Jude Scott, and today we're going to paint a portrait in watercolour. The man photographed was a face from a crowd. Lovely skin tones, warm, soft skin tones. He was looking into the sun, so he's squinting. And I've chosen this photo because it's got very strong light and very strong shadows on the face. So if ever you're choosing a photograph to paint from or a life subject, make sure that they've got strong light and shade on their face. It makes it much easier to draw the face up and to paint it, and it's easier to, I kind of think, to see where you're going if you've got very strong contrasts. I'll list the colours underneath when I finish dubbing the movie. I've been able to put the original photograph in the bottom left-hand corner for you, and I've drawn up here the portrait. So this covers the drawing and the painting, as well as colour mixing for the skin tones. So when you're drawing, I call it mapping and plumbing. Map across where are the eyes, whereabouts do they meet the ear, from the bottom of the ear, how far down, where does that meet on the neck, the bottom of the nose, where does that end up, where the nose joins the bottom lip is dead in line with the inner right hand eye that you can see. So all of those things make it easier for you to get a good likeness in your portrait. I've just mixed up raw sienna, quinacridone red and cobalt blue, and then I've mixed a darker mix which is ultramarine with the other three colours, just a touch of them each, just to grey off that blue slightly. So here I'm using quinacridone red, raw sienna and a touch of cobalt blue so that it's not too pink, not too orange. I've just dulled it down slightly, but keep your darks very warm, because if you make them too cold, it will take the life out of the skin, and the skin will look very washed out, very grey, and it will lose the life that you want to have in a watercolour portrait. So I've just touched a little bit of the darkest mixture, the ultramarine and the other three colours mixed together for the eyebrows. And although it looks probably very dark to start with, it will fade as it dries because it's quite wet. The more water you have with your watercolour, the more it will fade as it dries. So don't rush in and wipe it off thinking that you've gone too dark, because it'll probably be absolutely correct. It will fade about 20% by the time it dries, with the water sinking into the paper, and depending on the paper that you use, often it takes a lot of the pigment with it. So I'm using Lanaquarelle paper. It's 100% cotton paper. It's a German watercolour paper, beautiful to paint on, and this one is a medium pressed, so it has a lovely tooth, or the texture of the surface of the paper, to paint on. I'm using Holbein watercolours. I really like Holbein watercolours. You can lift them off so successfully from any watercolour paper, and they come off. I've just made this a little bit darker there, too dark to start with. So you can lift off just by pressing down with some kitchen paper, and it's a really successful technique to take it back to almost white paper. So I have got just a damp tip on my paintbrush, and because the paper is dry but the paint is quite wet, I can just drag that down to put a very soft first wash of colour onto the face. I think it's really important to keep when you're doing at this stage of the painting, keep the tip of your paintbrush just damp, and it's easy to drag out that wet paint and soften the lines. You don't want sort of hard eyebrows and hard edges at this stage. They're the last thing that you do. You want to be able to drag that paint out successfully so that you don't have any hard edges forming where you don't want them. Now there's just a bit of warmth in some of these areas, so I'm just putting in the very first very pale wash so that I can come back into that later and put subsequent layers over the top of those first washes of colour that I'm putting down now. There's lovely light on the man's forehead, and that's usually the point of the face where you have light on someone's head if they don't have a lot of hair there, because the skin is stretched tightly over the surface of the bone. The same with the nose, and usually the cheeks are the three places where you'll have quite light areas. So you don't have to know a lot of anatomy, but just being aware that where the skin is tightly stretched, that's where you'll have the lightest skin tones because of the light reflecting off the tight surface. Just putting a little bit of tone in up there. Again, I'm just using the basic colours of raw sienna, permanent rose, or you can use quinacridone red. I'm using a little bit of quinacridone red. And if it looks too orange, just add a touch of cobalt blue just to grey it off a little bit. You don't want him coming out to look too red or too yellow or too grey at this stage. Just a neutral, warm tone. And if you're finding it really difficult to mix up skin tones, just think of the colour of a jar of foundation makeup, and that is really, it's just a warm, neutral, muddy colour. That's perfect for skin tones. And then you can always add a very pale wash of red to that to warm it up, or some blue to cool it down. So now I'm just following the planes of my drawing where I've left out the reflection on the nostril. I've left that so far as unpainted paper, and the highlight on the nose, I've left that also as unpainted paper. And because the paper there is just damp, I can just touch my brush with some more paint, a bit more pigment. I can warm it up or cool it down. The nose is always warmer than, for instance, the centre of the forehead or the lower jaw. So just adding a little touch of quinacridone red into my basic skin tone to warm that up. I think this man has a wonderful face for a portrait because he's got such interesting eyes, and they're wonderful to paint. It's not easy to get to photograph somebody, I find, to make a good subject for a painting, but I think it's like painting. The more photographs you take, you'll soon think, oh no, that one didn't work. I haven't got enough light, or I've got too much light. Don't use a flash if you're taking photos of a face, because there won't be any shadows. And the shadows are what define, the shadows and the highlight is what defines the contours of the face, the surface of the face. Just as if you were painting a landscape, it's the light and shadows in the landscape that form the mountains, the gullies, vertical surfaces, horizontal surfaces. They all receive that light differently. And that's how you can sculpt your flat piece of paper into looking three-dimensional. The photograph that I've used for reference, of course, the shadows are much darker on the face than they would be in reality. I could have warmed the photograph up, but I've left it as it is. That's pretty much how it came straight out of the camera. So again, just sculpting with my brush, dragging that darker pigment around. I can add a bit of Cobalt Blue here because it's further away from the light source and that side of the face will be cooler. Just roughly taking a very light wash over that ear and down the back of the neck. At this stage, you might think you've got to get back to another area of the painting. So don't leave one section with sharp edges. Soften off those edges. You can always come back and add more pigment later if you've left soft edges. But once those edges are hard, they are so difficult to lift off so that you get the fresh look to your painting. It's better off just fade it right out with water like I'm doing here, and then you can come back to it at any stage and paint over it again. There's just a little bit of warmth under those eyes, and the one on the left-hand side is taking the white off that. I find that painting a landscape and painting a face, for me, are not that dissimilar. It's almost like following a road map with your brush on a day when it's working. Sometimes it doesn't work at all like that and you have terrible trouble. But when it's working well, it's such an exciting feeling to be able to get the colours the right temperature, and the tones are really important. So you want warm and cool tones in a portrait, the same as you would have warm and cool tones in a landscape. You wouldn't have all warm colours and you wouldn't have all cool colours. So this painting was actually from a class that I did on last Thursday, and most people had terrible trouble with the chin. He hasn't got an easy chin to paint because there's a lot of shadow and his chin is tucked back into his neck. So I've said to the students, when you're painting or drawing the neck, just turn your paper upside down and turn the image that you're using as your reference material upside down, and you can straight away see where you've made an error, because you'll see, oh, okay, that line's coming out too far there, this one's not coming out far enough. So that can be a really handy tip, so that when you turn it upside down, you're looking at what you can see, not what you think is there, and your mistakes will just jump out at you. It's a little bit like holding your drawing up to a mirror to see what's right and what's not. Another way is take a photo of or just look at it through the lens of your camera and you'll think, good heavens, that's way out over there or not out enough. So all little tips and hints that can help you get a better likeness. So the skin there is quite a lot darker. It's probably a number 3 on the tonal value scale of 1 to 5. So you need to make it darker. I don't put any darker colours in like black or anything like that. I just use the same 3 colours, raw sienna, cobalt blue and quinacridone red, but put less water in. So if this is too yellow, put a little bit of the red in. If it's too red, maybe put a little bit of blue in, just a touch, and you'll be able to get this. It's almost like makeup foundation colour. And then you just have to, with your brush, move around on that forehead where it's dark, put pigment on the paper, and where it's really light, you can leave it totally unpainted. I love the freshness of watercolour portraits when you've got areas of light that are left just as white paper, because unpainted paper is worth gold. So just softening that area there of the stretched skin with a just damp brush. So a just damp brush is dipped in water and then dried off on your towel, or I use a block of car cleaning chamois, which is fantastic. It just sucks the excess water out of your brush, because watercolour is all about getting the right amount of water with the right amount of pigment at the right time, and that does take practice. And don't rush this. The joy of watercolour is that you can, if you're starting to get frustrated, things aren't going right, just put your brush down, close up your paints, walk away and come back tomorrow, or go and have a cup of tea and come back. And often when you get up, step away from your painting, you'll see things through fresh eyes and go, gosh, that drawing is not correct, or I've got too much colour here, not enough tone there, and it's much easier to see clearly when you're not tired. Because as soon as you start to get tired, you start doing things that you wish you hadn't, and it can start to go horribly wrong. So I've just put that warmth in across the cheekbone, but to get that shadow down the lower jaw, it's really important that the cheekbone area stays wet so that the two sets of pigment can blend together and it will look more rounded, it'll have more form for the face. So just continuing on. And damp tip of a just damp brush, because that curve is just coming around onto the the light that's showing up his chin. Now I'm going in to sort of put more tone into that area of the neck and the ear, so you can see it's quite strong. I do need to get that to look darker, because the darker that is, it will show up the difference in tone between the highlights on the face and the shadow at the back. So leave some little sections of hair as unpainted paper. If you can't, it doesn't matter. You could always come back with a tiny bit of white watercolour. I use titanium white sometimes. Titanium white is more opaque than Chinese white, so it's a good paint to have in your box, but only, please, for emergencies. Don't rely on it too heavily, because once you've used it, you can't really paint over it. It will make all the other colours look washed out, and it will just look wrong. So only keep it for very few areas. So the shadow under the nose will actually give you the shape of the nose and the shape of the top lip. So it's really important to get that quite dark, but make it a warm dark. So that's got a lot, that particular shadow mix has got a lot of raw sienna and quinacridone red in it to keep that nice and warm, and it gives the look of reflected light. Just adding a little bit, sculpting that shape of the nose out there. That shadow goes through just under the curve of the nose and down along the bridge of the nose. And you can see now how the lightened shade is giving a three-dimensional look to the face. It's the only way that we've got of adding dimension to a flat piece of paper. So cool areas recede, warm areas come forward. Just adding a little bit more tone to the underneath of the eye. And a little bit more to the shadow under the crease below that eye. Yep. And now it's time to restate the darks in the eyebrow. So the dark I've used is just Ultramarine with some of the other three colours mixed in to make a warm dark. So now I'm just combining that a little bit more with the paper so that it's not quite so harsh. And just putting in the pupils now with a fine line brush. You can see I've left the neck quite sharp there and unfinished, but I have a plan for that. I know where I'm going to go with that. I've got to put the collar and the shadow in down there. So that's all coming together. And it's always good too when you're painting to get up, because this is done sitting down, move away from your painting, stand and have a look at it. Go away, have a cup of tea or coffee and come back and you'll see the painting with fresh eyes, and it's amazing. Sometimes you get a pleasant surprise and other times you can get a nasty shock. So don't keep painting. Get up and move, walk away, and it's also good exercise because you really do need to look at your work with fresh eyes so that you keep it. Sometimes you can work and not actually see you're actually making a mistake much worse than it should be. And it's a good idea when you've finished your work to put it up somewhere for several days, where you can see it every time you walk into a room or go past, and you will soon see maybe things that you thought were fine when you painted it, they will jump out at you and you think, why did I put that there? It's way too dark. It's definitely not light enough. all sorts of issues can show themselves. This piece here just keeps disappearing. It's not, I keep doing it darker and then it becomes too pale. So you do need to sort of keep checking. Is this dark enough? Is this warm enough? You can always put, if an area gets too cool, so long as you've got transparent paint, you can put a warm wash over something that's too cool, and vice versa, you can put a cool wash over something that's too warm. But if you're putting a wash over something that you want to warm up or cool down, make sure that it is transparent and it's completely dry. Don't put a wash over something that's damp. You will end up with disappointing mud. So I'm going to put the background in at this stage because I want to use that to cut in around the face. And there was some unpainted paper there that was very difficult to show you where I'd left it unpainted, but now you can see that cutting in with a dark colour, and I've kept this, I put blue because we've got warm skin tones, and a blue background always looks wonderful with warm skin tones in a portrait. So you can just cut in there where the hair will be. It's got some wonderful hairs sort of showing. It's not a dead flat, the top of his hair. And a lot of this I will soften off when I finish the painting, because you need some what we call lost and found edges on your painting, where you can't see the outline of everything. So, for instance, we've got a lost edge under the nose. The tone under the nose is lost in the background, but it's in very sharp relief between the eye and the nose, and between the bottom of the nose and the top of the lip. So I can darken that up a little bit. So that paper's quite wet, so the background is going in lovely and soft. Sorry, I've missed with the camera. I got quite carried away here and didn't realise that the camera wasn't focusing on the section of the painting behind the head. So I apologise for that. So I'm just softening the back of the head so the hair and the background become one. And same here, you don't want all of that to be too harsh. Have some of it just soft. So my brush, again, it's a damp brush. It's rinsed in water and then dried on a towel. I'm just using the tip to try and replicate the look of that soft, pale hair on the top of the head. So the hair at this section of the head, as you can see from the reference photo, is quite dark. Even though it's basically white hair with a touch of grey, it is quite dark there. So it would be, I think on the tonal value scale, about 3.5, and some of the hair in that grey is also in shadow, so you can't leave all that as white hair. It's got to be, it's in shadow, so even though it's white, it is greyed off a little bit. So I'm going to put the collar in. So just check the point that you're bringing your collar in at is true to a model sitting in front of you or it's true to your photograph. There's a very dark shadow behind his neck there where the jacket touches the back of his neck. And then where the grey of the jacket is in full light, it's very pale. So the grey that I'm using is, again, it's just a mixture, quite strong ultramarine, and then I've put in enough yellow and red, the yellow being the raw sienna, to make that a grey. And the other side of the jacket, I'm not going to worry about doing I think he had like a purple shirt on. I'm just doing a bit of texture, so if you get your brush and just drag it across the surface of your paper, you'll replicate enough. I don't want a lot of detail in the t-shirt, certainly don't want to put the pattern in. I want the face to be the hero in the painting, not the pattern on his shirt. And then I'm just dragging out with water some of that grey for the jacket, softening off that edge. I've tried in this video, I'm using new lighting, so it has really bleached out the tone that I put in the back of the portrait, the back of the head on the portrait, which is not like that when I finished the painting. It's a lot lighter in this video than it is for the finished painting. So I might have to adjust the lighting on the video again. So because the collar's still quite damp, I can just take a damp brush across that and make the collar less distinct against the skin. But I don't want to go as dark in the throat area as the photograph, because I think that's a little bit too dark. Okay, now here's the finished portrait. I did a little bit on the back of the head. You can see that the colours there are much stronger now in this finished portrait than they were in the actual video. So I've still got a bit of tweaking to do. Over on the right hand side in the background, I forgot to mention I've just splattered some just water into that ultramarine, the grayed off ultramarine, and I've softened the edge of his jacket below the throat and below the chin, because I don't want that to be too hard and to distract the eye from the face. So I do hope that you've enjoyed painting along today. I've really enjoyed doing the painting. And if you've got any requests, or if you would like to see anything in the future, please leave a comment, and we can have a different subject next time. And if you've got any questions, please leave a like, and any suggestions are always welcome. Thanks very much for watching. Happy painting.